I'm sorry about that. We were rudely interrupted there, and I'm not quite sure why. Yes, I was telling you about the weather here in Perth, and obviously somebody got a bit jealous. We had worse days than this during the summer. This is great. I love it when you get to the middle of October and there's still people sitting outside in the cafes and that with a glass of wine or a cold beer. I just wish it was me. But here I am. This is my job, so I've got to do it. Uh, what am I on the day? I'm still stinging. I'm still stinging from the weekend, from the SNP conference and the carry on there. That still rankles. Obviously, still rankles with a lot of people going by the noise on social media and the comments in the national below the line comments in the national. There's still there's a lot of anger and there's a lot of apologists out there as well. The but more on that later. First of all, it may have seemed bad to you, the SNP conference, but Seamus Logan, MP, SNP, obviously, he tried to sweeten the pill a wee bit. So, with an article in a column in the National today. Aberdeen proved the SNP can debate, disagree, and still move forward. Well, I'm very dubious about that, Seamus. I felt compelled to write a reply to this. So, it's gone online by now, but apparently it hasn't. That's me. There it is. And screen just needed a wee refresh. The Gremlins are teasing. Yeah, I had to write a reply to that. So it's now a blog. It's called Sweetening the Pill with a question mark. If you can imagine bathing in a pool filled with Lyle's golden syrup, then you'll have a fair idea how I felt after the sugary confection of Seamus Logan's review of the recent SNP conference in Aberdeen. The SNP MP for Aberdeenshire North and Moray East ladles the saccharine praise for delegates and especially for John Swinney. It all makes uncomfortable reading for anyone in possession of functioning critical faculties. Mine maybe not functioning so well. Among the vaunting claims made by Mr. Logan, there is this. Anyone in Aberdeen over the weekend would have seen a well-attended conference with genuine meat on the agenda over the independence strategy. Robust but respectful debate, delegates willing to unite behind what had been agreed, and a varied set of policy discussions taking place on both the conference floor and fringe. If he thought that was meat, then Seamus Logan is being seriously ripped off by his butcher. As far as the constitutional issue is concerned, the agenda was positively skeletal. The mouldering gristle of the leadership resolution was garnished with scrappy amendments meagre enough to shame a nouvelle cuisine chef. In the end, the scraps were discarded and the gristle was served in a sauce of glutinous rhetoric intended to disguise the rancidness of the dish. The real meat never made it to the menu. The Newington resolution, which, if passed, would have restored the SNP as the party of independence, was seized on submission by party operatives wearing full protective clothing, lest they be contaminated with the fresh thinking that is anathema to the party. Seamus Logan acknowledges that there are some who turn their nose up at what was finally presented, while referring to some of the ingredients of the cloying sauce concealing the revolting resolution. He says, I know there are still some who doubt our approach this time, but anyone who heard John Swinney speak on Saturday or Monday could hardly doubt his commitment, sincerity, or drive. Seamus imagines we don't know that commitment, sincerity, etc., are things politicians slip into and out of, like the rest of us put on and take off socks. But the phrase doubt our approach at least demonstrates that Seamus has mastered the art of understatement. I don't doubt the Swinney approach to the constitutional issue. I deplore, denounce, and deprecate it. On one point, I must agree with Seamus Logan. In his closing paragraph, he writes, the conference settled the process argument for independence in present circumstances at least. Present circumstances being while the SNP is in power. I feel he's right. I suspect we are now stuck with a strategy which prioritises not the restoration of Scotland's independence, but maintaining SNP dominance and keeping the leadership clique in receipt of the rewards that come with elected office. The dish served up by the SNP is not merely unpalatable, it is toxic. This strategy was on the turn when it was first served up by Nicola Sturgeon a decade and more ago. It is a strategy based on acceptance of a subordinate status and grovelling deference to Westminster. It involves validating the British state's veto on the exercise of our right of self-determination. It means acceding to the alien doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty and denying the sovereignty of Scotland's people. The strategy is all of these poisonous things, even if it works, and it won't. Not as independence activists would hope, anyway. Even if granted, which is imaginable only with the benefit of the finest hallucinogenic compounds, the referendum John Swinney is abasing all of Scotland by begging for can never lead to the restoration of Scotland's independence. But, as I say, I fear Seamus Logan is correct. The matter of process has been settled, but it has been settled in a way that is entirely unacceptable to those who seek to preserve Scotland's distinctive political culture as well as our identity as a nation. That the people of Scotland are sovereign is both a constitutional fact and an inviolable principle. John Swinney, with the doltish acquiescence of the SNP membership, proposes to violate the principle and eradicate the fact. The SNP's betrayal of Scotland's cause is a bitter pill to swallow. Seamus Logan's revisionist review of the SNP conference seeks to sweeten that pill. But there isn't enough Lyle's golden syrup in the world to do that. Yeah, as you might gather from that, I was not mightily enamored of Seamus Logan's take on the SNP conference. It's a take that some people agree with, and some people out there think it was wonderful. and are they going about how well John Swinney spoke and his commitment and his drive and his sincerity. I can do sincerity. I really can. But they don't bother about what he actually said. They're not looking at the content. If they were looking at the content, they might think rather differently. But they're not bothered about the content. They're thinking only if John Swinney says, this is what will get a win for our team, then let's go with it. I cannot understand why people aren't prepared to scrutinise the SNP, and they want to deter others from scrutinising the SNP. I'll come back to later. There's another item in the National today that I wanted to take a quick look at. Can the SNP win a majority in 2026? Experts give their verdict. There's some things in this article, never mind the fact that the experts' verdict, although they're too polite to say it, is that John Swinney is an idiot. He may not be. He may not be an idiot. He may have reasons for what he's doing, because if the SNP, as is more than likely, if the SNP fail to get that majority, they'll have got the extra votes anyway. But if they fail to get the majority, John Swinney has a ready-made excuse for not doing anything or doing the nothing which he's best at. He gets another excuse for that, of course, if and when Keir Starmer tells him to not to bother him just now, to come back later. Don't call us, we'll call you. That's two excuses he's got for doing what he's best at. Nothing. I've rarely seen a man work so hard at doing nothing. I know I've said that before, but after that conference, yeah, it's true. It's painfully true. Back to this article about whether the SNP can actually get this clear majority of SNP MSPs, which, as I say, is vanishingly unlikely. Phrases jump out at me from these sort of articles, and there's one here which is part of the narrative. It's not a quote. It's an article written by Hamish Morrison. I don't know Hamish. I just know that he writes things like this. He refers to the promise of an independence referendum is on the table. No, it bloody isn't, Hamish. There is no promise of an independence referendum on the table. There's the promise of a Section 30 request if everybody in Scotland votes for the SNP, but only if everybody votes for the SNP. And even if that Section 30 order is granted, the referendum that arises from that is not an independence referendum. It's not about independence. It's about the SNP staying in power. It cannot be about independence. It cannot be a proper constitutional referendum because the British state has the final word. In a proper constitutional referendum, the people have the final word. In a Section 30 referendum, Westminster has the final word. So, sorry to tell you, Hamish, but that is wrong. It is just wrong. And it's important to point out that it's wrong. Excuse me one moment while I take a drink. Yeah. It's important to stress how wrong this is, because people get deceived by this. As I was saying, I think I said the other day, or I wrote in an article, I don't remember these things, but I know I either said it or I wrote it. The National supposedly the newspaper that supports Scotland's independence campaign, the National, persists in referring to, excuse me, persists in referring to John Swinney's independence strategy. He doesn't have an independence strategy. There is no independence strategy. But a lot of people out there think there is. And they continue to think that there is because, partly at least, because the National keeps telling them that there is. There is no independence strategy out there. It isn't an independence strategy. At best, it's a strategy to go grovelling to Keir Starmer, begging for permission to have a sham referendum. A sham referendum. That's all it is. It's not an independence referendum. It's not an independence strategy because it does not have independence at the end of it. It ends well short of independence. It ends if the SNP don't get the majority that John Swinney is demanding. Or it ends when Keir Starmer tells him to go away, come back later, don't call us, we'll call you. It ends long before independence. There's another point that is made in this article about how the situation is very different now, and that we in 2011 we had an Alex Salmond government that had been in government for 4 years, and I think it's generally agreed that he'd done rather a good job by the standards that we're accustomed to in the UK anyway. He did a very good job. His government did a very good job. I would argue that even John Swinney did a good job at that time as finance minister. He was finance, yes, he was. And it's different now. It's different now because the SNP is different now. They've been in government 20 years. That alone makes a difference because in 20 years, you accumulate a lot of missteps and misjudgments and errors. All governments make them, but they accumulate over time. And the media tends to remember the cock-ups rather than the small victories. But it's different now, partly because the SNP has been in power so long, but also because their style of government is different. The name I gave to the term I came up with to describe Alex Salmond's style of government was what was it again? Oh, yes. Principled pragmatism. Principled pragmatism. That's what it was. It was a case of whatever gets the job done, but the red lines, never cross the red lines. And that, to me, characterised Salmond's government, the way they operated. They looked at things rationally and pragmatically, and they actually looked for solutions, not for what would be popular with voters or what was going to go down well with the party or even what was going to please the media. They were looking for solutions for things that actually worked, and they did a pretty good job. Now we have an SNP government which is driven by, I should also say that Alex Salmond's government was also driven by the independence imperative. That's the two factors, the principled pragmatism and the independence imperative. These were the things that that motivated Salmond's government. Now we have a very different SNP, which is motivated not by independence, but by the the desperate need to cling to power and the trappings of power, the status, the salaries, the short money, but perhaps most of all, the status, the power. Power's addictive, and these people have got a taste of it and they want to cling to it. So the independence imperative is no longer for the SNP. It's the stay in power imperative. It's the electoral imperative and not the constitutional imperative. And the style of government is different also. It's much more driven by dogma and the internal forces of the SNP. It's much more top down. Its conference is pretty useless unless they happen to agree with the leadership. The delegates just get ignored. Don't think Alex Salmond was quite as keen on that. But it's pandering to the media, pandering to the British state. Alex Salmond maintained good relations with his opposite number in Downing Street with David Cameron because it was expedient. But what we see with John Swinney and others is it's craven pandering, or it's forelock tugging. They genuinely treat Scotland as subordinate, and they act like a colonial administration. And to be an independent nation, your government must be acting like the government of an independent nation. Your parliament must be acting like the parliament of an independent nation. You've got to take that action first and then take the people along with you. So long as you have a base of support, this idea that you have to have a majority, that you have to have the battle won before you engage, is just idiocy. We have somewhere around 50% support for independence. That's a lot more than a lot of nations had in the past. But because they've taken action, because they've gone for it, they took the people with them. They took the people to places the people didn't know they could go. Now that is true leadership. John Swinney, he's no leader. He's barely ready to go to places that we're allowed to go. Never mind places that we aren't. No, it is totally changed. The style of government and the circumstances and the wider environment has changed as well. So I think pretty much the unanimous verdict of the experts was that it's pretty much no chance. But I never use the word impossible for these things because there is always that possibility. 2011 taught us that there is always that possibility. In 2011, it was thought to be impossible that there could be a majority government for any party. But it proved that it was possible. However, the circumstances are very, very different, and they are not conducive. They're very much not conducive to John Swinney's ambition to engineer the fluke of 2011, because it was a fluke. Nobody planned that. Alex Salmond certainly didn't plan it. He was as much taken by surprise as anybody, which is why he had to deliver a referendum. After that result, he had to deliver a referendum, and pretty much immediately. And the only way to do that was Section 30. So that's why he was forced into that. I'm pretty sure it wasn't his first preference, but he was forced into that situation by these circumstances. And I suspect David Cameron, everybody was taken by surprise. So the 2014 route referendum emerged out of very different circumstances, making comparisons between now and 2011, the 2011 to 2014 period, making comparisons is very dubious. To imagine that you can replicate that chunk of history, just take it up and do it again, but do it intentionally, without all the actually engineer all the coincidental things that went together to let 2011 happen. This is what John Swinney imagines. Or does he? Perhaps he's well aware that it's not going to work. Like I said earlier, it gives him his excuse for taking no action. And it's entirely possible that he's looking for that excuse. And the reason he'd be looking for that excuse is that he knows full well what action is required, and he's not prepared to take it. He's not prepared to be bold. He's not prepared to seize the moment. He's not prepared to stop grovelling to Westminster, stop deferring to Westminster. He's not prepared to act like the First Minister of an independent nation. And if he's not prepared to act like that, he's never going to be the one who'll deliver independence, a term I'm not entirely enamoured of. No, John Swinney is either a fool or he knows perfectly well that his so-called strategy is doomed to fail, and to fail badly as far as everybody else is concerned, certainly badly as far as those who are foolish enough to think that it can lead to independence. They're going to get a massive disappointment, but it will fail in a way that suits John Swinney and his colleagues, because they'll have another 5 years in office, in Parliament, with the power, with the status, with the salaries, with the short money, which the SNP desperately needs. So it's entirely possible that this so-called strategy has been picked purely because it's almost bound to fail in every respect. That is why, maybe, can you think of another reason why anybody would choose to do that? Can you think of another reason why anybody would choose a strategy that is such a vanishingly remote chance of success? Why would you do that unless you wanted it to fail? No, it's the motives for these things are in there if you look for them, but you have to scrutinize. And a lot of people are just not prepared to do the scrutiny, which brings me to my third and final item for today, if you can stand it. And it's from the letters. As I've mentioned before, the letters page of the National is often the most interesting and the most irritating, because there are a lot of really stupid comments in there, but there are also some gems. And even the stupid comments can sometimes be good because they can spark a response. Sometimes it's the stupid comments from politicians or punters. Sometimes it's something really stupid that somebody has said that makes people think, because they react to it as stupid, and then they try to explain why it's stupid. And in order to do that, they have to recognize the stupidity. If their first instinct is that it's stupid, they're probably right. But then they've got to think about it to explain why it's stupid. If they're thinking about it, that's great. Huh? That's a step forward. This morning, I found a letter, a short letter from a chap called Peter D. Chain from Barbaraville, which is a place that I didn't know. It's up near Nig Bay, around Nig Bay somewhere, north of Nig Bay. I'm not quite sure, but it's up there. Barbaraville is a lovely name for a town. I think since I have time, I'll read out his whole letter so that you'll know what I'm talking about when I get to my response. Excuse me one moment. My throat really doesn't enjoy these programs, these shows. This this is a letter to the National from Peter D. Chain, Barbaraville. He says, "What a sad letter from Jim Taylor in Monday's paper. I can't believe anyone desperate to see an independent Scotland would write such a letter. I'm 86 and as disappointed as anyone that progress for independence has not been quicker. But I am also realistic that until we unite and grow our support, we will defeat ourselves by bickering and splintering our movement. We just need to look at Scotland's history, and it's very plain to see that when we unite, we are strong and capable. But when there is disunity, we end up being easily defeated. I have great admiration for John Swinney and the way he is leading Scotland, not just the SNP. There is no doubt the behaviour of our Scottish Government, our First Minister, and other ministers are streets ahead of their Westminster equivalents." That's a backhanded compliment I've ever heard. As for poor Jim and his view that he is not going to vote SNP, and even worse, will try to persuade others not to, my view is that the shockingly poor turnouts at elections are a contributor factor to our lack of progress to independence. The Unionists seem to be able to get their vote out more successfully, probably because many of them are financially comfortably off. Let's hope that Jim is just stirring the pot to waken us up. Well, he stirred you up, Mr. Chain. He certainly stirred you up. There's some dreadful nonsense in there. The poor turnouts. The poor turnouts are explained by the fact that the SNP has let down the independence movement. The independence movement is staying at home. They're just not coming out. That's why there's been low turnouts and the drop in the vote for the SNP. Yes, I know it's picked up a few points lately, but it's still way down on 2015, for example, when things all started to go wrong. Anyway, I rather angry riposte to Mr. Chain. Readers of the National will be wearily accustomed to letters such as that from Peter D. Chain. Daily, both on the letters page and in comments, we are subject to a barrage of missives, berating others for criticising the SNP and pleading for unity. So long as it is on the SNP's terms. What we never see from people like Peter D. Chain is any attempt to address the content of the criticism. Sorry, my throat just went there. What we never see from people like Peter D. Chain is any attempt to address the content of the criticism. They have no defence against the charges. They have no answer for those who find faults and shortcomings. They have no counter-argument to offer those of us who scrutinise the SNP's past record, present performance, and future plans and judge any or all unfavourably. Rather, Peter D. Chain and his ilk would have us forget the failures of the past, turn a blind eye to errors and misjudgment, and remain oblivious to the true nature and implications of the party's proposals. They urge us to abandon our critical faculties and forego the scrutiny due all politicians and political parties as the price of unity. They ask us to be silent and still in the face of dishonesty and deceit. They demand that we tolerate treachery and betrayal in the name of Scotland's cause, just as they tolerate treachery and betrayal in the name of partisan advantage. Since 2014, I have watched as the SNP transformed itself into the epitome of a colonial administration. I have seen opportunities to advance the liberation struggle squandered through gross ineptitude or malign intent. I looked on in horror as the membership of the SNP approved a strategy which prioritises not the restoration of Scotland's independence, but maintaining SNP in power and keeping the leadership clique in receipt of the rewards that elected office entails. And Peter D. Chain tells me I should say nothing. I say he can get to yon place. See, I do try to avoid swearing on this, but they try to lure me into it. They try to force me to swear. They're forever at it. You know, they're trying to force me to swear online, but I won't do it. Well, I might. There's stuff there that would make a saint swear, as the saying goes. This is deplorable. All political parties and all politicians must be subject to constant scrutiny. They should be subject to constant scrutiny by the media, but the media abandoned that responsibility many years ago, perhaps 30 years ago. The media no longer do the kind of scrutiny. Referring back to what I was saying about the article on the SNP's chances of getting that majority, where there was a reference to there being the promise of an independence referendum on the table. There is no such thing. And there are constant references to John Swinney's independence strategy when he has no such thing. So the media are not scrutinising the politicians and the political parties. They're not even examining them. They're just parroting whatever's said. They're not. If they were scrutinising the politicians, if they were scrutinising policies and positions and proposals, they'd be saying the kind of things that I'm saying. They would, because if you examine these things, like if you examine John Swinney's proposal, you're bound to come to the conclusion that I've come to. There is no other sensible conclusion. There's no other logical conclusion. What he's proposing simply will not work. And if it does work, it's a disaster that won't work. But it starts off being a disaster for Scotland anyway, because it starts off with him requesting a Section 30 order, requesting permission to do something that we have an absolute right to do. By doing that, he is validating the Westminster's veto on the exercise. He's saying that that's okay. because the right to refuse is implied in the request. You don't request something that you're going to get anyway. You request something because it's being withheld, because it's currently being refused. It is in a state of refusal at the moment, and you want to end that state of refusal. Uh, you can't request a Section 30 order without saying, well, it's okay, fully accept the Westminster's right to say no. And if you accept Westminster's right to say no, you're putting Westminster above the people of Scotland. You're accepting the doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty. You're putting Westminster above the people of Scotland. That is what John Swinney is proposing to do. Never mind the stuff about it being just to get the SNP votes and it being daft because they'll never get that majority, and daft because Keir Starmer will never grant the Section 30 order. It's not just daft; it's despicable. It is treacherous. I honestly, I see very few people online and in discussions. Very few people seem to realise this. This is a colonial mindset. They see somebody, their first minister, deferring to Westminster, and they have no objection. They don't react against it because their colonised minds think that that's okay. To the colonised mind, that is the natural order. That's the way things are, the way things always have been, and the way things should be. You can't see past it. They can't break down that barrier of the colonised mind and see John Swinney's proposal for what it actually is: treachery. I doubt actually if John Swinney sees it that way. I doubt if he even realises the implications of what he's doing. If he does, then he's a he is not a good person. If he realises the implications of what he's doing, and he's doing it anyway for the sake of getting some votes, then yeah, he goes into the ranks as one of the worst politicians ever. Because what he's playing with is Scotland's political culture and national identity, and he's just toying with it like it's worthless. So I could quite believe, however, that he doesn't understand the implications because his mind just doesn't work that way. He has the mind of a British politician. He's working within the British system. This was always a danger. I talked about this years ago. This was always a danger for the Scottish National Party, that they had to wear two hats. They had to be the party of an independent Scotland and also the party of devolution. The First Minister had to be both the leader of the independence movement and the First Minister, answerable to Westminster, answerable to London. That was a very difficult position to be in, a very difficult balancing act, very difficult tightrope to walk. Alex Salmond managed it. It hasn't been managed since. None of the others have managed it, and they've fallen on the devolution side of the tightrope because it's easier. As simple as that. It's easier. Politicians are no different from anybody else. They're lazy and avaricious. They're different in that they maybe have more of a hunger for power and status, but other than that, they're lazy, and they'll take the easiest option. They'll take the easiest route, and that's what devolution is. Stick with devolution. Stick with the thing that is working, as far as John Swinney and his colleagues and the SNP, as far as they're concerned, it's working. It's working for them. It sure as hell isn't working for Scotland, but they're trying to make out it is working for Scotland. It isn't working for Scotland, because even if the SNP is making things a bit better in Scotland, it's only by using our tax money to mitigate what is being done by Westminster. So it's not that much better. It's not as good as it could be. That's the other thing. That's the thing that I very seldom talk about. But because I like to stay focused on the how of independence and not being independent. It's the becoming independent that I want to focus on, because obviously, to my mind, if not to others, the becoming comes before the being. I think that's just logic at work there. So I'm more interested in the becoming, but that doesn't mean to say that I don't have a vision for what Scotland could be. I most certainly do. There are a lot of things that I'd like to see in an independent Scotland, but I don't talk about them because there's already a plethora, a myriad visions out there, a confusing mass of visions, so much so that the general public don't know what to make of it, and it's not impressing them. John Swinney's talking about building support by showing competence, but people aren't impressed with governments boasting about their competence. When they're competent, they're only doing their job. People notice when they're not doing their job. When they do something right, that is just them doing their job. People notice when they do things wrong. Telling people that they're going to be £10,000 a year better off, or was it £10,000 a week or £10,000 a day? It doesn't matter. Who the hell believes those kind of promises anyway? I'm 75 years old. I can't remember a time when politicians weren't promising prosperity for all just around the corner. Nobody pays any attention to those things anymore. These promises don't move people at all. What moves people, what gets people moving, is action. Action breeds action. Action breeds support. Action breeds enthusiasm. Inaction breeds nothing. And that's what we've had for the last 11 years. Inaction. Pusillanimous procrastination. A phrase I came up with that people seem to enjoy. But that's what it is. They're just too cowardly to confront the British state. It's a sad state of affairs, a very sad state of affairs. I'm attending the Liberation Scotland AGM just across the road in the Salutation Hotel, conveniently enough, this Saturday. And I'll be sounding out some of the people there, because that's one crowd where you can get a serious conversation about the constitutional issue. And also next month, November, I think it's the 18th. It is the 18th of November. I'll be going through to Glasgow, somewhat less convenient, for the latest Independence Forum Scotland convention, their autumn convention, at which the afternoon has been given over to discussion of the how of independence, how it actually make it happen, the actual process. And I've seen the agenda, and as far as I can make out, I will be the only one talking about an actual process. But I'll be talking to people both at the Liberation Scotland AGM and at the IFS Autumn Convention. I'll be talking to them about, especially at the latter, because I have to do a presentation, which I must get around to preparing. I'll be talking about a strategy, a well worked out strategy, a strategy that's been mulled for many years. It's been altered, it's been amended, it's been commented on and criticised. So occasionally there is sensible criticism of it by people who have actually read the material, very occasionally. But it's now a strategy that I don't see how it can possibly be introduced. I don't see how we can possibly get there. It very much depended on and all the independence parties adopting the manifesto for independence. Well, it's quite clear that the SNP is not going to do that now. It wasn't even discussed. One of the things that Seamus Logan said in his sugary confection was that there was open discussion of all the alternatives. I think he actually used the phrase "all the alternatives." That is untrue, Seamus. That is just untrue, because we all know, or those of us who've been paying attention know, that the really important resolution, the radical resolution, the Newington resolution, was sabotaged, dumped before it ever even got near the agenda. It was just dumped. It wasn't allowed anywhere near. The things that were allowed as amendments, not as standalone resolutions, they were allowed as amendments because the leadership knows that conference is generally reluctant to amend leadership resolutions. I don't think there was any motion to remit back, but that would be about as far as anybody would go. They were unlikely to vote against the resolution because it was the leadership resolution. And even if one of the resolutions, the one championed by Graham McCormick, for instance, even if it passed, then it would allow John Swinney to drop the SNP only aspect of his own strategy, which he must be beginning to realise has been a bit of a disaster. It will allow him to drop that and say, "Well, I'm following conference's instructions for once," but then just ignore the rest of it. He can pick and choose as the first minister, as the leader of the party. He can pick and choose. He could take any pro-independence or nominally pro-independence party part of the amendment and simply ignore the rest if it had been passed. Of course, it wasn't. And these amendments were only allowed because A, there was very little chance, vanishingly little chance of them being passed, and B, they weren't going to do a great deal of harm. They weren't going to put a dent in the leadership resolution, even if they had passed. Okay, we're nearly at the end of our time, and my throat is telling me that we're nearly at the end of our time. On Sunday, I'll be back 10 o'clock Sunday morning, And I'll be joined in the later part of the show after I've had my Sunday morning rant. I'll be joined the second half of the show by Stephen Duncan. Sorry, I'm desperately trying to remember what it is he's looking at. I should have had a note of that because my memory is dreadful. But you know damn fine it is going to be something interesting that and possibly controversial. Stephen's number crunchings have been that ever since he started, both interesting and controversial, and that's the kind of thing we like. Anyway, I'm going to call it a day. I'm going to let you out of school early uh, so as I can go and have a beer and get as a treatment for my throat. And I'll be back with you on Sunday. Bye for now.